10 years after the last dark and more adult version of Oz hit television, Emerald City premiered on NBC in 2017 for a 10-episode first season, which was also the last season. Yeah, this series didn't resonate with critics or audiences, it seems. What did I think of it? I really dug it, but you can tell I like the darker Oz adaptations in general, can't you? Much like Tin Man, the story involves a 20-something Dorothy Gale, this time played by Adria Arjona. She works as a nurse in the small Kansas town of Lucas. Hey, the town finally has a name! Anyway, Dorothy wishes to make contact with her real mother, but ends up in the back of a police car when a tornado comes a-blowing by, as tornadoes are known to do in Kansas. In this version, the land of Oz is under the tyrannical rule of a very fascistic wizard, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, who has outlawed all magic. From there, we get cardinal witches allying against the wizard, the land of Ev making preparations for war against the Emerald City, a boy named Tip turning into a girl, and Dorothy caught in the middle of all this political chaos. The cast and crew of this series is one of the highlights of it by far. Adria Arjona is one of my favorite Dorothys and the first Latina that we've seen in the role. She projects strength, caring, and vulnerability in a way that's different from Zooey Deschanel, but is still representative of where this character would be in her 20s in modern times. Vincent D'Onofrio is fantastic as an explicitly Orson Welles-inspired version of the wizard, who manages to be dangerous despite having no magical powers. Jolie Richardson, who's always great, plays a mysterious and rather icy Glinda, and a Romanian actress named Ana Ulara plays a particularly compelling witch of the West who runs a brothel and is addicted to poppies to drown out the pain of having been removed from power by the wizard and no longer being able to use magic, at least not legally. And best of all, every episode of Emerald City was directed by Tarsem Singh, a really gifted visual director who directed one of my favorite movies, The Cell. Much like Emerald City, The Cell had a Latina lead, had Vincent D'Onofrio as a villain, and had a lot of mind-blowing visuals in a fantasy world. How about that? A particular shout out that I want to give is to someone that most of you have probably never heard of, Jordan Loughran, who plays Ozma/Tip. She has the arduous task of playing the boy and girl versions of this character, and she does a fantastic job of playing both. Her entire struggle is one of identity. She spent most of her life as a boy and she believes herself to be a boy, but when she runs out of the magical elixir that keeps her in the form of a boy, she assumes her true form of a girl. Not only does she have to deal with her new, parts, but she has to grapple with how society views women. She has a great scene where she directly addresses the false virgin-whore dichotomy that societies have traditionally enforced on women. That's great stuff, and I'm surprised people don't talk about it more. Also, Emerald City is the only Oz adaptation that we've looked at that touches on the transgender themes that have always been present in the character of Ozma. And that's not a postmodernist reading of the text either. It's right there in the marvelous land of Oz. Ozma was transformed into Tip to prevent her from becoming Queen of Oz. She spends most of her life in a form that doesn't represent her true self, but upon becoming her true self, she ascends to her rightful place on the throne and feels whole again as a person. I'm surprised there hasn't been a full-blown Ozma-centric Oz book written by a trans person about the trans experience. The source material is ripe for that interpretation, and I think the social climate's ready for it. This series is full of great homages to Oz deep cuts beyond just grabbing characters from the larger Oz mythos. The wizard's real name is Frank Morgan instead of Oscar Diggs. Frank Morgan was the name of the actor who played the wizard in the 1939 version. That's kind of a cool shout out. Also, on the wizard's tape player is the Pink Floyd song Breathe from The Dark Side of the Moon, an homage to the supposed link between the Wizard of Oz and Pink Floyd, but that's a whole other story. One of the common criticisms of Emerald City is that it combines the Oz books with a politically heavy fantasy epic like Game of Thrones. This is true, and you'll either love or hate this show because of this fusion. Personally, I loved it, but I also loved Tin Man when people derisively compared it to Battlestar Galactica. Another criticism is that the characters are less of adaptations of the Oz characters and more like equivalents of them. And that's a bad thing? I mean, it worked out pretty well for Tin Man. For me personally, Emerald City transcends the novelty of a fusion and has a lot to say in its own right. I'd argue that it's deeper than Tin Man, and I think it could have gone in even more interesting directions had it had another season. But, much like NBC's equally ill-fated Dracula series, Emerald City didn't last long, and most people have forgotten about it. But hey, just because the mainstream doesn't get an Oz adaptation right away, doesn't mean it'll stay that way forever. Let's keep this show alive.